National borders can be a tricky thing. Sometimes they're obvious, marked by a river or mountain range or sea. Other times they're contentious, usually because they're man-made or have no obvious natural barrier. And sometimes even the quote-unquote nice countries of the world like Denmark, Canada, and Norway can have disputes over who owns part of the land or sea. And you might think that Denmark's border disputes are something from the past, likely causing a war with Sweden. But even in recent history, Denmark has had fights with their neighbors, sometimes even going to international court. One such famous dispute with Canada just came to a close. Let's start with that one. So you may have heard that the Whiskey War finally ended, but what's that all about? It's all about an island called Hans Island. It's located in the Nares Strait, which is between Greenland and Ellesmere Island in Canada, and it's a dispute that goes back, honestly, to 1853 when the island was first discovered by European explorers. The island is named after an explorer named Hans Henrik, who's actually Inuit, and he's got a fascinating story himself. He was part of many Arctic expeditions, and he actually was the first Inuit person to have a memoir written. So he's an important person that maybe we'll dig into more in the future. The first time that the dispute was resolved was actually in 1933. This was when the World Court, part of the League of Nations, ruled actually in favor of Denmark, saying that it was part of Greenlandic territory and therefore the island was Danish. There was some truth to this one in the fact that the island has some cultural significance towards Greenland. In the past, it was Inuits from Greenland that used the island as a base for hunting, whereas the Canadian Inuits on Ellesmere Island typically didn't go over towards the island itself. But this ruling by the World Court didn't really have any legal validity since the two countries didn't fully agree on it. And in the 1970s, Denmark and Canada started to work to define their maritime boundaries through the entire Arctic area, including through the Nares Strait. As they went through this, obviously they found that not only was Hans Island in between the two of them, they realized that with more detailed maps, the island itself was literally right in the middle of the strait. So they did what any two passive-aggressive governments would do. They basically agreed to ignore the issue for now. And so with the treaty that defined the maritime boundaries between Denmark and Canada, explicitly delineated everything except for the exact distance covered by the island itself. Although the island status wasn't fully resolved at that time, there were other activities where Denmark and Canada worked together to define different aspects of maritime boundaries and economic exploitation and things of this nature in the area. But one thing they did agree on was that since it hadn't been resolved, they'll agree not to provoke each other. However, the Canadians did provoke here, and it's because Canada had some of their oil companies start to do some exploration around this area. And in fact, this probably would have gone unnoticed as they did some of this exploration during the 1980s, except for the fact that a local Greenlandic journalist happened to be doing a story on the island. And when he went there, he noticed there was somebody from a Canadian oil company there. And in fact, not only was a Canadian oil scientist on the island, they were also wearing a shirt that said Hans Island NWT, meaning Northwest Territories, indicating that at least the company believed that the island was Canadian. The journalist wrote a story in the local newspaper, but it kind of went viral, as things I guess did in the 80s, where it got picked up first by a Copenhagen newspaper, then by the Canadian embassy, and then it finally made it back to Canada proper in the CBC. Obviously, with a provocation like this, Denmark had to respond in some way, and so they did. The Danish minister for Greenland, Thomas Høyem, took a visit to the island. He went up to Tula Air Base, got on a helicopter, landed on the island, and brought with him the Dannebro and a bottle of Danish schnapps, thus indicating Danish sovereignty on the island because if you plant a flag on it, it's got to be yours. Canada responded in kind by raising their own flag and starting to put Canadian whiskey on there, and thus the first shots of the famed Whiskey War started. Over the next 20 years, the island would be regularly visited by the Canadian and Danish militaries, typically as build-up towards elections, the chance to get a little bit of nationalist fervor. But it really came to a head in 2005 when the series of escalations on this had gotten to the point that it really seemed kind of ridiculous for the two countries that happened to be NATO partners. At this time, Canada reached out and said that they thought it was appropriate to begin final negotiations on the status of the island, to which Danish Prime Minister Rasmussen agreed. Rasmussen stated, "It's time to stop the flag war. It has no place in a modern international world. Countries like Denmark and Canada must be able to find a peaceful solution in a case like this." Of course, that was 17 years ago, and the wheels of international boundary disputes turned quite slowly. During this period, there continued to be some visits between the two different militaries. It would end up in the media every now and again, even making it to the US, as John Oliver reported on the dispute of Hans Island as well. But this all changed this past year, as in 2022, the two governments decided that it was time to settle the status of Hans Island for good. One of the main hang-ups during this time is that both Canada and other international observers simply would say that it was sensible to split the island in half. Denmark didn't always accept this because, again, culturally, the island was an extension of Greenland proper and had been used by the Greenlandic Inuits for centuries. And so they didn't want to fully concede sovereignty over an island that they believe is entirely Danish. At the same time, Canada would continue to show that it had sovereignty over the island by continuing to exercise mineral rights and sending scientists there, trying to prove an economic basis for Canadian sovereignty of at least part of the island. In June 2022, the two countries finally came to an agreement. They decided that they're going to split the island in half. After all of this dispute, they finally just said, you know what, let's just split it and each take our own half. In truth, the agreement was prompted by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Given the fact that we had such a blatant example of a territorial dispute being handled by guns and ammunition, it was a decision of the two countries that, again, are NATO partners, that it was inappropriate for them to continue having this sort of dispute in this day and age. In the end, the two governments came together in June of 2022, had a final agreement on this, and then came together with a press conference in good harmony and good fun, sharing whiskey with each other, thus showing the end of the whiskey war. At the same time, there was some solemnity in the moment, given the fact of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and in fact, it was marked by some words from Danish Foreign Minister Jeppe Kofod. He said, "Man-made boundaries only matter so much. More important is the cooperation between people. Diplomacy and the rule of law actually works. May this agreement inspire others to follow the same path." Beyond the diplomatic ramifications, this is also a great moment for geography nerds, as there's some new fun facts that we get to share. For one, this 1.3 kilometer land border between Canada and Denmark is now the third shortest international boundary in the world. The only shorter ones are the 155 meter long border between Botswana and Zambia, and the 1.2 kilometer long boundary between Spain and the UK at Gibraltar. Additionally, this also means that both Canada and Denmark, which used to only have a single land border with a country, in Canada's case the US, and in Denmark's case with Germany, now each have a second land border partner, and that's each other.
Now, Hans Island was not Denmark's only dispute in the Arctic. Denmark also claims the North Pole, which actually kind of makes sense when you think about the Danish Christmas tradition that says Santa Claus or Juleman comes from Greenland. This dispute potentially has higher stakes, though, than that little island between Greenland and Canada. This is because of the extensive hydrocarbon resources that likely lie beneath the Arctic Sea. The Arctic countries of Russia, Canada, the US, Norway, and Denmark, representing Greenland, all have competing claims on the Arctic Ocean that are still in dispute. These claims are part of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which has developed a protocol for ocean floor territorial claims based on not just the distance from the shore, but also based on the length of the continental shelf. This gets highly technical, but basically a country's exclusive economic zone of the ocean is about 200 kilometers from the shore. However, a country can claim that the seafloor beyond 200 kilometers is theirs if it's considered continental shelf that extends from its actual landmass. This is a big deal for oil and gas exploration, since it means that countries can get exclusive rights to undersea oil reserves that are far from their shoreline. In 2014, Denmark claimed that an underground sea range called the Lomosov Ridge extends from the continental shelf of Greenland and thus should be considered part of the Danish realm. Canada has a very similar claim that the ridge is an extension of Ellesmere Island and is thus Canadian, while Russia claims it's an extension of their territory as well. No surprise there that Russia thinks some territory is theirs. But the rules are set in the UN Convention, and they state that a multi-country panel of experts has to review these claims and make a decision based on extensive geological surveys. Now, these reviews typically take about 10 years to be completed, which means that we still have a lot of time and potentially years until the report is actually published. And even then, after the report is published, the countries actually have to make a political agreement, as the experts only make a technical recommendation. Many observers treated the Danish claim as kind of wild because it's a massive extension from the territory that they're claiming. Now, there's a belief that the claim is primarily political goodwill towards Greenland, as the claim is wildly popular there. And essentially, this is a way to show Greenlanders that Denmark cares about their well-being and also has resources there to invest in the extensive economic research that's required to submit and defend such a claim. So, where will this one end? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
So Denmark has border disputes that aren't just in the Arctic, they're actually in the North Sea as well, particularly after oil and gas was discovered in the 1950s, and all the bordering countries were scrambling to make sure they had well-defined boundaries that were fair and, more importantly, gave them as much oil and gas as possible. One such dispute was with Germany. Now, one of the concepts that we need to understand as we look at this is something called equidistance. Essentially what it means is that as you lay out maritime boundaries, what should be fair is that you essentially take where the land boundary ends between two countries and continue it so that it's equidistant or equally distant from each country as you pass out into the sea. This is a way that makes sure that you can essentially mimic land boundaries into the sea. Now, the challenge with this was that if you were to draw in this way on the North Sea between the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark, you would actually get to a point where the equidistant lines from the Netherlands and Denmark would run into each other, thus blocking Germany in much closer to their shores. Germany didn't think this was fair, and so in 1968 they actually took it to the International Court of Justice, claiming that equidistance didn't apply here because it wasn't equitable and fair. In this case, Denmark and the Netherlands disagreed, saying that equidistance was the standard to be used, and therefore Germany should be stuck with the boundaries as they were. In the end, Germany won. The ruling of the court was essentially that equidistance is a good starting point, but it's also important that all of these are done in a rational, fair, and equitable way to make sure that all countries are treated in a way that math wouldn't be unfair towards. In doing so, you can see that Germany ends up with a little finger of territory that extends between the Danish and Dutch claims as well, showing they got a little piece of the central North Sea action as well. But in Danish lore, it's not the German dispute that's remembered about the North Sea, it's the one with Norway. And this is because of the legend that when the negotiations between Norway and Denmark were being held in the early 1960s, the Danish foreign minister, Per Hagerup, was actually drunk and thus gave away extra territory to Norway that thus allowed them to become the major petrostate they are today. This, unfortunately, is a little bit more legend than fact, but we shouldn't let some facts take away a really good story about how Denmark got screwed by the dastardly Norwegians. The facts of the story indicate that even if Minister Hagerup was sober the entire time, it probably would have ended up the same exact way. The technical reason why Denmark thought they should have gotten a larger claim goes back to the similar claim that Denmark is making about the North Pole. Essentially what they're saying is that the entire northern half of the North Sea is an extension of the Danish continental shelf. The reason for this is that there's a large trench, the Norwegian Trench, off the coast of Norway, thus ending their continental shelf very close to their shore, whereas the Danish one goes all the way to the other side of the trench. But while you could make a claim on continental shelf, probably this never would have mattered in the end. And there's three reasons why. First of all, when the UK and Norway negotiated their settlement between their borders in the North Sea, they agreed to go by equidistance and essentially pretend the trench didn't exist. For those two countries, they believed that the trench was a bit of a geographic oddity, and therefore it wasn't worth including it in making a fair claim between the two countries. It'd be really hard for Denmark to claim something that the bigger and stronger UK had already conceded towards Norway. Second, it would force Denmark to speak out both sides of their mouth, since at the same time they were claiming that equidistance should have been the rule of the sea as they had their dispute with Germany. It would have been really hard for them to claim on one hand that they should count equidistance when it comes to Germany, but continental shelf when they're talking about the Norwegians. That definitely would have held up in international law. And third, the 1969 ruling that was in favor of Germany in that case also settled the fact that things should be fair and equitable when resolving these sorts of issues. So in the same way, it wouldn't seem fair and equitable for Denmark to have the entire northern half of the North Sea and Norway have a very little piece of it. And so for that reason, any claim that Denmark could have made against that wouldn't have held up in international court as well. Denmark tried pleading with the Norwegians to have a larger claim, but it was nothing more than a plea. There was no way that Norway was going to give up what was rightfully theirs, no matter how much Denmark asked. So in the end, while Denmark tried to reclaim a little bit of Canute's North Sea empire, it didn't pass the muster of modern international law. But you know what? They tried, and it makes for a really good story in the end. Now, if you enjoyed this video about disputes, then you should make sure that you check out next the video that we made about the dispute Denmark is having with Russia in the Baltic. And make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, because we're going to continue on the story of Denmark's frenemy with Norway in a subsequent video in the next couple of weeks. So make sure you subscribe for that when that one comes out. Hi.